All my friends, fellow gaming enthusiasts. We call it breakfast with the Fat Man. Yeah, sort of. I just did a second take on the video for the Greek chorus, and got thinking about minions and secondary NPCs, secondary player character NPCs, and their value and problems. I know, I can't tell you how many times, especially when I was more of a novice player, when I was younger, when I was a kid, of just how many player characters we created for a given game, for a given campaign. We had our primary, and we had a bunch of secondary supporting role player sheets. And the idea being was that because I come from a small town, a small rural community, and because there's only so many nerdy, geeky kids in those communities, and it's you don't have a large pool of people to have a good-sized gaming group. So my gaming groups are rarely more than two or three people, and usually it's two if I'm lucky. And a lot of times it was just one, and so you felt the need to have those other character that was implied in the books that you should have, the cleric, the rogue, the wizard, the fighter, the ranger or bard. So you felt like you needed to have 5 or 6 or 8 characters to have a good, well-rounded group, even if you didn't have a player to run them. So you doubled down. Either the GM played 1 or 2 NPC characters, or the player juggled 2 or 3 or 4 in some cases. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that it wasn't always necessary to create a campaign or a game, even a one-off fire. We're sitting down for the day kind of game where you need to have this large cast of flutes. Sometimes you can get by with, or actually you can have some very good and creative gameplay just having the 1 or 2 characters. You got 2 players, you got 2 characters. Adapt. This is not everybody had the well-rounded strike team. It doesn't always work that way. And then there's a number of character classes that promote itself to being the 1 or 2-person game. Think of a druid, for example, or a ranger. These are both character classes that are actually it's unusual for them to act as part of a larger group for any length of time. This is where we come into that concept of the multiple characters. If you're running a long enough campaign, it's plausible to have a dozen different characters over a year. I've had a campaign go 6 years, and we didn't play religiously every weekend, but about once a month we got together and pushed the story further along. We kept developing it, and characters would come and go. And sometimes you had these that stepped in for a scenario or 2, or stepped in for a few turns, or maybe even a month or so, and then went on their merry way. They were there as tools to push along the story itself, or to shore it up in some cases, or to fit a niche. Well, somebody had to play that character, and unless the GM really truly is talented and wants to take on the role of 20 different supporting role characters along with all the other MPs and stuff, and you have that time to do, fine. But it was just simpler and easier to hand it over to one of the players. Now, back to the Jedi concept from Star Wars. Like I said, much harder to have a specialist and have them go off on a tangent, their own little mini adventures, and then have the rest of the players basically sitting around the table, thumbing through books and raiding the Cheeto bag, waiting for their turn to come back around so they can get back involved again. If that goes on too long, people get bored and you lose track of time or things, and it's not necessarily conducive to that good play. Of course, if you have the Greek chorus and they're well established and everybody's happy with the commentary, then it may play. It may be able to be stretched out, so to speak. But if you have that a character such as the assassin, for example, The Artemis Iridae, for example, much more suited for the lone wolf tactics. That 1 or 2 player game where it's the assassin and his associate, or the assassin and her what do you call it? Her apprentice, right? Or the assassin and the unwilling specialist that's needed for some scenario, or the bad guy, the good guy quote that the bad guy caught kind of scenario, when you got Artemis and Regis making their trip through back to, so Regis could face the music kind of stuff. You couldn't do that with a larger group of players, not and have some half of the group sitting around potentially a lot of time. You're split 2 groups. You might as well have 2 different groups, one in this room and one in that room. And as a GM, I've tried that. I won't do it again. It's too taxing. It's too taxing, and it's not good for the social cohesion of a group. It might play well at a convention, maybe, or if you're doing come as you are meets at the local game store. But I wouldn't do that in a regular game campaign with regular players. Not again. It's just not a good thing to do. And like I said, there's a lot of games. MechWarrior is another example of having layered characters is better than having one set of specific characters. There's so much stuff going on. There's so many opportunities, whether you're involved in house politics or in in the merchant trade, or you're in a mercenary outfit or a house military outfit. Traditionally speaking, you can have an entire campaign revolve around a small company of mercenaries. One of them's the captain or the whatever, and the rest are supporting role people. There's the political mindset stuff when you're playing in a house. If you're trying to do something like Game of Thrones on a larger scale, multiple characters is a must, unless you're really, really good at keeping the bigger picture while separate but very prominently aware, because so many things are going on in the background that the characters become blinded. They get the blinders on, the players and the characters and the GM to some degree, and we're so focused on this narrow little thing that at some point we sit back and we take the blinders off, look around and think, what happened to the bigger picture? Where are we? We are nowhere near what we thought we were going to do, or the initial concept that we put out in the script is we went off script, something terrible. So there you have it. The value problems of playing multiple characters, having multiple layers of characters. Now, I'm still working on this new concept, or this somewhat new concept, of not having a specific character, but having this revolving cast of actors. So the players, instead of investing in a specific character, invest their time in propelling the story forward as we roll through this somewhat changing cast of characters in a larger story, a larger world. The idea there is that nobody becomes invested specifically in one persona, and so we are more inclined, maybe less or more inclined, to see those heroic characters get offed. If something happens to one of them, we're not going to be personally quote butthurt about it, because we've allowed us all this time and effort and energy to get wasted in some aspects, because there is one of the big problems that's always been kind of lurking under the table when it comes to investing in your character. You want to become immersed in the game system, but you want to invest in that character. You want that character. You want to own it. You want to create it. You want to guide it. You want this. You got this plan, and you want to develop it and see, or you want to see where it takes you, and you spend a lot of actual personal time, your time at your home, thinking about it and plotting it and doing the paperwork on it, and then there's the time that you put in at the game table playing that character, and it's a long-term character. Well, This is that mindset develops. If we play a campaign that runs months into a month, more than a month, if you're playing more than 5 or 6 sessions in a campaign, then that character becomes much more important to the player than perhaps it ought to be, because then it would become less and less likely to want to allow something terrible to happen. And that's part of the game mechanics. Death is prominent. Things go south, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And we tend to find every way possible to avoid that. Then there's the popular character. I'm guilty of this one. I'm guilty of this one. Sometimes you'll get a player and a character that will come together and be so well meshed, so personable. You enjoy them so much because they're colorful, and they're capable, and they're amusing, and they're dramatic, and you put all that effort and time into it, and they become more than the game. And so the idea of that particular character meeting their demise is actually painful. As a player, and as a GM, and as a would-be author, I run into this problem. I've run into this problem, and it wasn't until a couple years ago, like I said, I started reading Martin's Game of Thrones series, and I started to see the value of letting the popular character die. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do, especially since you're acknowledging that once you off them, traditionally speaking, they're dead, and you can't continue exploring that character's potential story. You can't continue being entertained by this character because the character's no longer there to entertain you. You can no longer invest your time and effort into the character because the character's dead. If you resurrect the character, you find some way to bring him or her back from the dead, then you're back to that defeating the purpose, the point. You're taking away something from the game, that chance of that element of certain demise. That was a topic that Ronnie Bradley came up with, I think, in a video recently. We was talking about the differences between video games and tabletops. Right, there's so much. I played enough video games, and I can tell you there's some really, really awesome video games out there, and they're really, really good ones if you can afford the bandwidth and the supporting stuff you need to keep playing well. In a video game, your character there's a potential chance in certain game systems, if your character gets killed, that's it. You got to go back and reboot from the beginning. They don't have saves. They don't have second lives, so to speak. Although most video games do give you that opportunity, either save and then reboot from a previous save, so you've only lost a little time, or you have that instant life where you're regenerated, and perhaps back in a safe zone or something. I remember a couple of games where we were always frustrated because if we got killed, we'd return at a safe location, except most of our stuff, or all of our personal stuff, was still laying out there, and so you had to rush all the way back out to wherever it was you were gaming at the time, hoping nothing picked up all your gear and loot and walked off with it. And that could either be game generated NPCs or monsters or fellow players, and it was always one of those and that's why it was almost imperative to go out in pairs or bigger. That way, if you got off, your buddy could grab your stuff for you. That's kind of the buddy principle. But you can't. You can still do that in tabletop, but it becomes harder in some aspects, especially when you've got that colorful character that everybody's invested in, or you're invested in, and they amuse you and they frustrate you, and you just can't imagine, the game continuing without them. And I've been there too. And I've been there with players that had that same problem. Well, Buzzface's character just took a dump, and there's nothing we can do to save him. The rock snagged him, he flew off with him. Well, what do? We keep going? No. And that particular character was the pivot pin for the whole group, and the purpose of the campaign partially revolved around that character, that character's in goal result. And now that that goal's no longer viable, and that character's no longer a pivot, there's no point for the rest of the characters to even be there. And so you either start a brand new campaign with the existing characters, and Fuzzface has to re-roll a brand new character that you now have to introduce to the group, or that's the end of the campaign. It just came to an end, and we go and start something brand new. At that point, the game session more or less is going to devolve into what do we do next time, and what are we going to, either character generation or discussing plot lines and potential things for a next campaign, or seeing who wants to run who wants to GM the next one. So, I've had it happen. I've planned for weeks in advance to have a really good session, and 5 minutes into it, it just you're just all right. Get the player handbooks out. We're gonna start all over again, or we're gonna do something else. And you know what? I found this game system in my closet. Let's play this. Yeah, let's try that one. So there you go. A lot more than 2 cents worth of rambling, but it's coming up in the middle of March in Iowa, and I got snow on the ground.